Summer in 1943. The fields of Brittany rippled under a strange, heavy silence. Crows circled above a smoking ruin that didn't belong to this quiet French countryside. A B-17 flying fortress, belly torn, wings fractured, its aluminum skin glinting like the scales of some fallen dragon. To the farmers who gathered at a cautious distance, it looked more beast than machine. They whispered that it had fallen from heaven, that it had bled fire across the dawn. By noon, Wehrmacht trucks had arrived. By dusk, the Luftwaffe had claimed it. Hauptmann Erich went step from a Kubel wagon and stared at the wreckage with a kind of grim fascination. At 33, he had flown more missions than he could remember and survived more close calls than he liked to admit. But this foreign monster made him feel like a student again. He brushed his glove across the scorched fuselage, reading the faded American markings like scripture. The letters still visible, DFT, belonged to the 324th Bomb Squadron. He knew their reputation. They'd flown through storms of flak and fighters over Bremen and come back limping, yet alive. So this is what they trust, he murmured. His mechanic, Lieutenant Karl Heller, younger and always smiling at the wrong moments, gave a low whistle. I thought these things were myths, he said, like the British tea that never gets cold. Engineers swarmed over the carcass. The B-17's nose cone was shattered, the left wing nearly torn away. Yet the interior impossibly still felt intact. Its ribs of alloy, its wiring, its turrets, all whispering of something deeper than engineering. Kessler, the flight engineer assigned to the recovery, ran his hands across the ball turret underbelly. Every gun faces a different direction, he said. It's like the Americans built paranoia into metal. His voice carried both admiration and unease. Heller climbed inside the cockpit and pressed his fingers along the control column. Feels heavier than a Heinkel, he muttered, but alive somehow. They worked through the evening. As the sun died behind the hedgerows, the light inside the fortress turned bronze, reflecting off the shattered glass and bullet-pocked walls. Went moved carefully, inspecting the gunner stations, waist guns, tail guns, dorsal turret, each position placed with uncanny precision. He imagined the crew who had manned it, 10 men, breathing in rhythm through oxygen masks, encased in thunder. He could almost hear them shouting over the roar, hands shaking, hearts steadying while the sky burned around them. He had fought against these very crews, seen them fall in flames, and still he had underestimated them. They designed this not for glory, he thought, but to endure. Outside, the French wind carried the distant echo of bells from a village untouched by war that day. Heller broke the silence. They say the pilot crash-landed alive. The Americans took their wounded with them. That's why there are no bodies. Wendt frowned, kneeling beside a streak of dried blood along the floor. Alive or not, he said, they left their ghost here. By morning, orders came from Berlin. The aircraft was to be restored and flown under German command. The message was stamped Project Butte, the trophy project. One was to oversee the operation. The goal was simple: understand the enemy by flying his wings. To him, it sounded both brilliant and blasphemous. Heller has always grinned. Imagine, a Hauptmann, he said, a Luftwaffe officer piloting an American fortress. Will confuse even God. For weeks, they worked under the sharp smell of oil and ozone. German mechanics replaced torn hydraulics with cannibalized parts from downed Allied planes. The engines were coaxed back to life with foreign manuals, half-translated and stained with grease. Every turn of the wrench was an act of curiosity and quiet defiance. Wendt felt it each night as he watched the hangar lights flicker against the polished fuselage. The fortress was changing, but not surrendering. Even under German colors, it looked American in spirit, broad-shouldered, stubborn, unyielding. As they pieced it together, they discovered small secrets. A radio system that could reach farther than most Luftwaffe sets. Oxygen lines that crisscrossed the cabin like arteries. Ammunition belts feeding into remote turrets that moved as if guided by thought. They built a machine that refuses to die, said Kessler one night, half in awe. Heller chuckled, tapping the metal hull. Or maybe it's just too dumb to know when to stop living. The laughter faded quickly. They all knew what it meant to keep flying when logic said not to. When the engines finally roared to life, the sound filled the hangar like a choir of thunder. 4 Wright Cyclones, reborn under German hands, growled deep and steady. The vibration ran through their boots, their chests, their bones. It was power made audible, and even the skeptics fell silent. Went stood near the nose and whispered, "It breathes again." He should have felt triumph. Instead, he felt something else, a trace of shame, perhaps, or fear. That night, he stayed late, walking alone inside the plane. The moonlight spilled through the shattered canopy, tracing silver lines across the metal. He stopped beside the navigator's table. Someone, an American long gone, had carved initials into the wood, RH, a quiet act of ownership, a human fingerprint in a war of machines. Went touched it, then withdrew his hand as though it burned. Who were you? He wondered. And what did you believe in when you built this? From the shadows of the hangar, Heller's voice echoed softly. She's ready to fly tomorrow. Went turned, half startled. Tomorrow? Yes, sir. Dawn. Command wants you at the controls. The words settled heavy in the air. Went nodded slowly. Then we'll see if she still remembers how. He lay awake that night, listening to the engines in his mind, the rhythm of a machine built by men who refused to yield. He thought of all the bombers he had shot down, the ones that burned like comets against the clouds, and how this single survivor had fallen into his hands as if fate wanted him to understand something. The line between enemy and admirer blurred until it was indistinguishable. The fortress was no longer just a trophy. It was a question, one he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Before dawn, the airfield shimmered with mist. The mechanics moved like ghosts, tightening bolts, wiping oil from metal. One approached the plane in silence. The nose gleamed faintly under the floodlights, its German cross freshly painted over the American star. Yet beneath the new markings, the faint outline of the old emblem still showed through, a ghost of allegiance impossible to erase. He paused, studying it, the way a priest studies an icon defaced by time. Some things, he thought, don't belong to whoever holds them. Heller joined him, carrying a flight jacket. "You look like a man about to duel with history," he said lightly. Went smiled without humor. History never loses. He climbed the ladder into the cockpit, the metal cold beneath his gloves. As he settled into the pilot's seat, he felt the faint warmth of old hands, long gone. Outside, the horizon began to glow pink, like embers waking. The mechanics stepped back. The engines coughed, then roared, shaking the morning stillness apart. From the control tower, the signal came, clear for takeoff. Went glanced at Heller beside him, at Kessler in the engineer's bay, their faces pale with awe and something like reverence. He pressed the throttle forward. The fortress began to roll, slow at first, then faster, the air trembling under its weight. And for a fleeting instant, as the wheels left the earth, Went felt the strangest sensation, a heartbeat not his own, steady and vast, pulsing through the machine. It was not German. It was not American. It was something older, larger, a will to rise, no matter who commanded it. And as the B-17 lifted into the mist, he understood that this was no ordinary flight. The war had built machines of destruction, but this one, this iron creature, was about to teach him what survival truly meant. The dawn over Reims airfield was painted in thin gold, the kind that carried both beauty and threat. Mist crawled along the runway like smoke from invisible fires. Hauptmann Erich stood beside the captured B-17, helmet tucked under his arm, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. The fortress loomed above him, freshly patched, its German insignia sharp against the ghostly outline of the American star beneath. It looked both conquered and defiant, like a prisoner who refused to bow. Inside, the cockpit smelled of oil, leather, and ghosts. The seat creaked under one's weight as he settled in. Lieutenant Karl Heller, ever irreverent, ran his fingers across the instrument panel with a grin. "Feels like flying a factory," he said. "Or a cathedral." Franz Kessler, The engineer climbed in behind them, his eyes scanning dials with a reverence that bordered on prayer. "Cathedrals don't growl," he murmured, "but this one might sing." Went smiled faintly. Beneath his composure, something old and boyish stirred, the awe of a man about to touch power that wasn't his. He eased the throttle. The four right cyclones awoke in a synchronized thunder, the hangar doors trembling with the sound. It wasn't the clipped bark of a German junker's engine. This was deeper, more human somehow, a sound that filled the chest and steadied the hands. The ground crew stepped back as the plane rolled forward, its shadow swallowing the morning light. As the Fortress lifted into the air, Wint felt the control yoke resist him, alive, stubborn, demanding respect. "She doesn't want to be tamed," Heller shouted over the roar. "She wants to be obeyed." At 2,000 meters, they leveled off. The sky opened like a vast blue sea, and for a moment there was only silence and vibration. Heller tested the radio, catching static, then an English voice fading in and out, a distant Allied transmission. He looked at Wint, eyebrows raised. "The enemy still whispers to his own," he said. "Should I answer?" Wint shook his head. Not today, but part of him wondered what would happen if he did. The crew's excitement quickly turned to concentration as they began testing systems. Kessler monitored the engine temperature. Heller mapped the gun placements and firing arcs. The Fortress felt impossibly complex compared to their Heinkels, its interior lined with cables, hydraulic lines, and ammunition chutes that seemed to think for themselves. It was a labyrinth of logic, each part feeding the next, like veins carrying lifeblood through steel. "This is not built by engineers," Kessler said. "It's built by believers." Wint's eyes moved across the horizon. The landscape below, patches of farmland, winding roads, distant rivers, looked peaceful enough to forget the war. But the moment he banked the plane, the illusion broke. The Fortress responded like a beast rediscovering its instincts. It turned not gracefully, but with authority, as though unwilling to yield its purpose even to its captors. "She flies as if she remembers," Wint thought. "Remembers where she's been, what she's done." An hour into the flight, they tested the defensive systems. Heller crawled into the waist gunner's position, peering through the plexiglass window. "You could cover the entire sky from here," he called. "Every approach, every angle." One could almost see it, the air filled with tracers, each gunner defending his small piece of heaven. It explained everything, how these bombers made it through storms of lead and fire. They weren't fast, but they were united, 10 men in one heartbeat. A fortress indeed. The mock attack came sooner than expected. 2 German Bf-109 streaked toward them from the east, sunlight flashing off their wings. Wint's voice stayed calm. "Simulated engagement. Let's see how close they can get." Heller swung the turret and squeezed the trigger. Even with blanks, the vibration rattled the whole fuselage. The fighters broke formation, climbing out of range. Over the radio came a flustered laugh. "Impossible. Every angle's covered." Kessler looked up from his gauges, astonished. "They can't approach without flying into a gun's path," he said. It's like trying to punch a wall made of fire." Wint didn't answer. His hand stayed firm on the controls, but something inside him shifted, a quiet acknowledgement that they were witnessing not just design but philosophy. This was how the Americans thought. Make survival a weapon. The attack ended, but the silence afterward felt heavier than before. Heller, sweat shining on his forehead, slumped back into his seat. "I almost pity our pilots," he said softly. "Attacking one of these with a 109 must feel like charging a mountain with a pocket knife." Kessler nodded, half smiling. "And yet," he said, "the mountain bleeds too. Everything bleeds." They circled back toward the airfield, engines thrumming steady as heartbeats. One found himself glancing at the empty seats, the bombardier's bench, the navigator's desk, the top turret behind them. Each seemed to hum with invisible presence. He could almost hear the ghosts of voices calling coordinates, adjusting altitude, shouting over static. The fortress carried memory like gravity. It made the cockpit feel crowded, haunted by men who had fought and fallen within its ribs. On descent, Heller tapped a cracked gauge with his knuckle. "Still accurate," he said with a grin. "American precision. Makes ours look like clockwork toys." One allowed himself a rare laugh. "Careful, Lieutenant. That's treason." The humor was small, but necessary, like light slipping through a gun slit. The landing was smooth, but the engines refused to quiet immediately, their rhythm stubborn as heartbeat. When the props finally slowed, the airfield fell into a silence too vast to feel safe. The ground crew approached hesitantly, as though nearing something sacred. Went climbed down the ladder, boots meeting earth, and the vibration still echoed in his bones. He looked back at the plane, at its heavy, patient form gleaming beneath the sun. He realized that for the first time since the war began, he wasn't sure which side truly owned the sky. That evening, as they debriefed, Berlin's command crackled over the radio, a new order. The captured B-17 would participate in a live demonstration, mock combat against other German aircraft. The goal was to study attack patterns, weaknesses, and blind spots. Went read the message twice, then set it down slowly. Heller raised his eyebrows. "So we become the enemy." "We become the truth," Kessler replied, his voice low. Went walked back outside as night fell. The fortress sat alone under floodlights, silver and solemn. He could hear the metal ticking as it cooled, like a beast resting after battle. A strange pride stirred in him. Pride not of ownership, but of understanding. He had spent years trying to destroy machines like this, and now he felt almost protective of it. War made thieves of admiration. He reached up, laying his palm flat against the cold fuselage. "You don't belong to us," he whispered. "But tomorrow you'll fly for us anyway." Somewhere inside the darkened cockpit, a gust of wind slipped through a cracked window, and the faint rattle of a loose control cable answered him. It sounded almost like a heartbeat, steady, unbroken, unafraid. Went drew back, staring at the plane that once symbolized everything he was ordered to destroy. He realized, with an uneasy clarity, that understanding the enemy could be more dangerous than hating him. Because once you understood him, once you saw his craft, his courage, his will, you might start to see yourself. And as the lights flickered over the captured fortress, casting long shadows across its wings, Went felt that dangerous recognition settle in his chest. Tomorrow they would test it again. Tomorrow, he thought, they would learn what happens when you make a fortress angry. The morning broke sharp and metallic, the kind of air that made breath look like smoke. The captured B-17 crouched on the runway, engines rumbling like a caged beast. Hauptmann Eric went check the sky, clear, cruel, endless blue, and climbed aboard. This flight was different. Today, the fortress would be attacked by German fighters in a full combat simulation. The airfield buzzed with onlookers, mechanics, officers, curious pilots, all waiting to see how an American machine would stand against German precision. When adjusted his gloves, he felt less like a pilot now and more like a man about to wrestle a legend. Heller settled at the radio, humming the same nervous tune he always did before takeoff. "Think they'll go easy on us?" he asked, grinning without joy. Kessler, tightening his harness near the engineer's station, didn't look up. Not a chance. They want to prove the German sky eats everything. Went's lips twitched. Then let's see if the sky has teeth. The engine screamed to life, a harmony of defiance and smoke. The fortress rolled forward, heavy yet determined, rising through the dawn like an old god dragged unwilling into war. Below, officers shaded their eyes as the silver shape climbed higher, sunlight striking the patched metal until it glowed like molten glass. At 5,000 meters, the world was all light and hum. Went tested the controls, steady, stubborn, perfect. Heller fiddled with the intercom, his voice echoing through the fuselage. "Contact soon. 2 109s from the south, 1 190 from the west." Kessler checked the pressure gauges. Engines green, turrets armed, all ghosts present. The first attack came fast. A Messerschmitt dove from above, slicing through the clouds like a hawk. Heller's shout filled the cabin. "Top turret now." The gunner's simulation fired. Tracer rounds streaked orange through the sky. The German fighter veered away, smoke curling from its wingtip as blanks rattled against the fortress's skin. Even without live ammunition, the sound was terrifying, a thunderclap echoing inside a cathedral of steel. When held the yoke steady, eyes narrow. "She defends herself like instinct," he muttered. The next two fighters came in low, trying to flank them. Heller swung the side guns. The vibration shook every bolt loose. The fighters broke formation again. Over the radio came static and laughter, real laughter, from one of the German pilots below. "Verdammt, there's no safe way in." Kessler wiped sweat from his brow, staring at the instruments. "They can't find a blind spot. It's all fire, every direction." His voice trembled with awe. The fortress groaned, metal flexing under strain, but the formation held. Went felt a strange pride rise in his chest, a pride that didn't belong to the Reich or any flag. It belonged to the machine itself. A second wave came from higher altitude. 6 fighters now, fanning out like sharks around a whale. Went pushed the engines harder. The Cyclones howled. "Brace," he said. "Let's see what she can take." The air filled with motion, fighters circling, diving, darting in and out of range. Heller's laughter turned breathless. "It's madness, sir. We're surrounded. And she's still winning." Tracer smoke curled around the nose. For an instant, Went thought he saw it. The shape of an American crew, ghost-like, manning the guns beside them. 10 shadows, 10 hearts beating through metal. The illusion vanished as quickly as it came, but it left him shaken. The radio crackled again. End simulation. Immediate landing order. Command sounded tense, almost panicked. But before Wink could respond, one of the FW-190s misjudged its pass. Its 20mm cannon spat real fire, a mistake, or perhaps eagerness, and 3 shells tore through the B-17's right wing. The fortress lurched violently, alarms screaming. Heller slammed against the wall. That wasn't blanks. Hold on. Went's knuckles whitened. The plane shuddered, dropping 100 meters in a single breath. Kessler fought to balance the fuel lines. Outer engine hit, but she's holding. He stared at the damage, disbelief flooding his voice. It should have snapped the spar. She's still flying. Smoke trailed behind them, but the fortress refused to die. Went coaxed her level, each movement precise, reverent. Below them, the attacking fighters pulled back, their mock combat turned silent horror. On the radio, the same pilot whispered, How is it still up there?" They limped toward the airfield. The right engine coughed, sputtered, but didn't quit. Heller glanced at Went, voice barely audible. "If she were ours, we'd have already built 100 more." Went nodded slowly. If she were ours, the war might already be over. As they descended, the airfield rushed into view. Tiny figures waiting, shadows stretching long across the tarmac. The landing gear groaned, but locked. The wheels kissed earth hard, skidding, then steadied. When the plane finally stopped, the silence that followed felt like reverence. The crew climbed out to meet a stunned crowd. Officers stared at the torn metal, the holes the size of fists, the engine still ticking with life. When pulled off his gloves, his face streaked with sweat and oil. "Gentlemen," he said softly, "the Americans build a plane that refuses surrender." Kessler bent to examine a jagged wound in the fuselage. "You could drive a knife through that hole and still find courage inside," he whispered. Even the ground crew, hardened men who had seen every kind of wreckage, stood unmoving. Later, in the hangar, Went wrote his report. His words were precise, but between the lines ran emotion he didn't dare name. No fighter can engage a fortress without accepting destruction. Every angle of approach invites retaliation. It is not one aircraft, but 10 men's faith forged into steel. Heller read the draft and chuckled softly. Faith forged into steel. You're turning poet, Hauptmann. Went looked up. You spend enough time inside one of these, and poetry starts sounding like math. Night came heavy and quiet. The damaged B-17 sat alone under floodlights, her wounds glowing silver. Wind hissed through the holes at her wing, a low, almost human sound. Went stood beside her, hat in hand. He thought of the unseen American crew who had once trusted this machine with their lives, of the discipline the ingenuity, the belief that bound them together. He had flown their fortress, felt its heartbeat, seen it bleed, and it had changed him. Behind him, Heller approached, lighting a cigarette with shaking fingers. "They're saying Berlin wants another test," he said. "Live fire this time, with heavier guns." Wint turned, the glow of the match flickering across his face. "And if she doesn't survive?" Heller shrugged. "Then we'll know how much it takes to kill a miracle." The words hung between them, thin as smoke. Wint looked back at the fortress, her scars catching the moonlight, her frame unbowed. For the first time, he felt something dangerous coil in his chest, admiration that bordered on treason. He reached out, resting his hand against the cool metal skin. The hum of the engines was gone now, yet he could still feel the faint pulse beneath his palm, as if the plane itself remembered every flight, every man, every storm it had endured. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "they'll try to break you again." His voice hardened. "But I've seen how you fight back." The night wind rose, rattling the shattered turret glass, and for an instant it sounded like laughter, deep, defiant, unbroken. The fortress stood silent, but in that silence lay a truth the war was not ready to hear. Even machines, when filled with enough human spirit, learn how to survive their masters. The air over Reims hung thick with the smell of oil and smoke, a storm waiting to break. Hauptmann Erich stood beside the B-17, its wounded frame patched again, its engines still streaked with soot from yesterday's accident. Berlin had sent new orders, one final demonstration. Live ammunition this time, full engagement. The goal, they said, was to measure resistance. To Wendt, it sounded more like a funeral. Heller arrived first, his humor thinner than usual. "They want us to tempt death again," he said, lighting a cigarette that trembled between his fingers. "Only difference is, this time death's been given permission to shoot back." Kessler followed quietly, eyes fixed on the fortress. "It's not a test," he murmured. "It's an execution." Wendt said nothing. He ran his palm along the fuselage, the cold metal pulsing faintly with memory. Each dent, each scar, was a story written in flame. "She survived worse," he said softly, though he didn't quite believe it. Then, louder, "engines in 10 minutes. When the propellers began to turn, the sound rippled through the airfield like thunder approaching. Soldiers gathered at a distance, their faces taut with anticipation. The fortress lumbered forward, heavy as guilt, and lifted once more into the vast, unfeeling blue. Wendt took her higher than before, past the haze, past the doubts, until the world below looked small enough to forgive. The radio crackled. "Attack formation inbound. 5 fighters, full ammunition." Wendt adjusted his headset. "Understood." His tone was calm, but inside him something coiled, a mixture of dread and defiance. He wasn't flying for Germany anymore. He was flying for the machine itself, for its stubborn refusal to bow. The first burst came sudden and brutal. A Focke-Wulf dived from above, its cannons blazing. Shells tore through the tail, sparks and smoke bursting like fireworks. Heller shouted, "Rear stabilizers hit," but Wendt didn't flinch. "Hold position." He banked left, forcing the fortress into a slow, deliberate roll. The gunners returned fire, tracer streams crossing the sky like lightning made by men. The fighters scattered, circling back for another run. Kessler yelled over the roar, "Oil pressure dropping on number 3. Wendt didn't answer. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, pupils wide, sweat glistening along his temple. The fortress shuddered under another hit, glass splintering, smoke seeping through the vents. "Come on," he whispered, voice trembling. "Don't let them think you can bleed." Another explosion rocked the right wing. Heller's laughter, wild and cracked, filled the intercom. Still flying, still alive. He fired another burst from the waist gun, the vibration shaking his whole body. You can't kill what refuses to fall. Wendt pushed the throttle to its limit. The remaining engines screamed, the aircraft trembling like a living thing under pain it refused to show. One of the fighters clipped its own debris, trying to pursue, spiraling out of control toward the ground. Over the radio, a shocked German voice cried, He's down. It hit the fortress and fell. The irony hit went hard. A German plane dying against an American one flown by Germans. The war had become a mirror with no reflection worth keeping. The smoke inside the cockpit thickened. Kessler coughed, his hands still steady on the gauges. "We can't stay up much longer," he warned. The wings giving way. Went nodded. "Then we bring her home." They turned toward the airfield, limping through a sky that now seemed endless and cruel. The fighters, perhaps out of ammunition or respect, held back. The fortress descended unevenly, coughing smoke and flame, her frame whining in protest. Below, the ground crew ran to clear the runway. Wendt's voice broke through the static. "Flaps half. Landing gear down." The mechanisms groaned but obeyed. The world rushed upward. For a heartbeat, it looked as if they might make it. Then the right landing gear collapsed. The plane slammed hard, skidding across the runway in a storm of dust and fire. Metal shrieked. The left wing tore free. The fortress spun, slid, and came to rest at last, a giant brought to its knees. Silence followed, the kind of silence that feels alive. Went opened his eyes to the flicker of flames outside. Heller's voice came faintly through the smoke. "Still here." Kessler groaned, blood on his sleeve. "Alive," he whispered. Went unbuckled, stumbling out into the open air. The fortress burned behind him, black smoke twisting into the pale sky. Soldiers rushed forward with hoses, shouting orders lost in the chaos. He turned back once more. Through the heat shimmer, the plane looked almost alive again. Its nose lifted slightly, as if refusing to die lying down. Later, as medics bandaged his arm, an officer approached, face pale. "Your report will state that the aircraft was destroyed in service of research," he said briskly. Went met his gaze. "Destroyed?" He turned toward the smoke. "No, you can't destroy something that's already become legend." Heller limped over, his grin faint but unbroken. "They'll melt her down, make bullets out of her bones," he said. Went nodded slowly. "Then every bullet will remember she once flew." Night settled over Reims. The wreck of the B-17 lay silent under floodlights. Its shadow stretched long and solemn across the tarmac. Went stood alone before it, the heat still rising off the metal like breath. He thought of all the men, American and German alike, who had placed their faith in the sky, who believed machines could carry more than bombs, maybe even meaning. He touched the scorched wing, the metal rough beneath his fingers. "You taught me something," he whispered. "That courage isn't about who builds the walls. It's about who stands inside them when they burn." From far off came the faint hum of another engine, another plane preparing for flight. Went didn't turn to look. He kept his eyes on the fortress, on the ghost of the star beneath the cross, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The war would go on, but somewhere in its heart, a machine built by enemies had proved that endurance was its own kind of victory. The wind carried the scent of ash and iron, the last breath of something immortal. When closed his eyes, for the first time, he didn't see sides or flags, only the sky, vast and silent, waiting to forgive what men had done beneath it.